The autumn rain fell in heavy sheets against the courthouse windows as Emma Richardson sat rigid in the marble hallway, her small frame engulfed by the oversized bench beside her. At 9 years old, she already carried the weight of adult trauma in her narrow shoulders. Her golden retriever, Scout, pressed against her leg, not aggressively, but with the gentle, knowing pressure of a creature who understood that the girl beside him was slowly falling apart. Emma's hands hadn't stopped trembling since dawn. She'd woken at 5 a.m., unable to sleep anymore, her mind consumed by anxiety about what was about to happen. For 3 years, Scout had been her anchor, the only living being who truly knew the darkness that lived inside her heart. When the nightmares came, Scout would alert to her distress before she even screamed. When the panic attacks seized her chest, making breathing nearly impossible, Scout's weight across her lap would somehow make the world feel solid again. This dog had saved her life more times than she could count. Her mother, Richardson, sat on her other side, one hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. Had aged dramatically over the past 18 months. Fine lines had deepened into crevasses around her mouth. Her eyes, once bright and optimistic, had taken on the hollow quality of someone who had fought too many battles. She wore a modest navy suit, carefully chosen to appear responsible and maternal, not threatening, not angry, just a mother fighting for her child. Her lawyer stood nearby reviewing documents one final time, her expression grave with the weight of what lay ahead. The hallway smelled of old wood and institutional polish, a scent that made Emma's stomach turn. Other people passed by occasionally, attorneys in expensive suits, bailiffs with their holstered radios, another family with children who looked equally terrified. Emma wondered if their lives were being torn apart too, or if this kind of pain was something only she experienced. She had learned, over many therapy sessions, that other children faced similar horrors, but knowing that intellectually did nothing to ease the crushing isolation she felt in her chest. 3 years ago, everything had been different. Emma remembered a time when her father, Michael Richardson, had seemed like a hero, a man who would throw her in the air and catch her, who brought her ice cream on random Tuesdays, who called her his little princess. But something had changed after her parents' divorce. It was subtle at first. Small comments about her mother being confused, stories that contradicted what her mother had told her, gentle suggestions that maybe Emma couldn't trust her own memory. Then the comments grew sharper. Her father started asking her to keep secrets from her mother. He told Emma that her mother was trying to turn her against him, that she should be loyal to him because he was the one who really loved her. Emma had believed him at first. She had been 7 years old, desperate to please both parents, trying to navigate a world suddenly split in two. But as the months progressed, the manipulation became more sophisticated. Her father would ask leading questions about her mother's dating life, trying to get Emma to report back to him. He would tell her that her mother's new boyfriend was dangerous, feeding her fears. He would punish her emotionally when she expressed love for her mother, going silent and withdrawn until Emma felt compelled to reassure him of her loyalty. By age 8, Emma was having severe anxiety attacks. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't concentrate at school. Her grades plummeted from A's to C's and D's. That's when Scout came into her life. Emma's mother had fought tooth and nail with her ex-husband to get Scout included in the custody arrangement. She'd hired a child psychologist to document Emma's symptoms and provide testimony about the therapeutic benefits of an emotional support animal. She'd submitted research papers, medical evidence, everything. Michael had fought back viciously, his lawyer arguing that a dog in the courtroom would be a distraction, that it would unfairly prejudice the judge, that it was just another manipulation tactic by his ex-wife, but had refused to back down. She had seen her daughter drowning, and she was determined to give her any tool that might help her survive. Judge had finally ruled grudgingly that Scout could attend the hearing as an emotional support animal, but her skepticism had been unmistakable. "The dog may attend," she had said in her previous order, "but it will be removed immediately at the first sign of disruption. I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus." Those words had terrified Emma. What if Scout acted out? What if the judge blamed her? What if this backfired and made everything worse? Now, sitting in this hallway with Scout pressed against her leg, Emma tried to calm her racing heart. Scout's presence did help. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, matching hers breath by breath until her own breathing began to slow. The dog had been trained extensively by a specialized service animal organization, trained to recognize the physical signs of Emma's anxiety and panic before she even consciously knew it was happening. Scout could sense the minute changes in her body temperature, her heart rate, her breathing patterns. He had been trained to respond with specific interventions, grounding techniques, pressure therapy, alerting behavior. But more than all of that, Scout simply loved her unconditionally. He didn't judge her. He didn't manipulate her. He didn't twist her words or make her doubt herself. His love was pure and constant. Emma's therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had explained it to her. Scout represents safety, Emma. In that courtroom today, when you're scared and confused, Scout will help you remember that you're safe. He'll help you stay grounded in what you know to be true. Emma had practiced with Scout for months. She had learned special signals, subtle hand movements and touches that would alert Scout to help her. These were her tools, her weapons against the fear that threatened to consume her. The courthouse clock chimed 9:15 a.m. Bailiff Henderson appeared at the hallway intersection. "Richardson case," she called out. "We're ready for you." Emma's mother squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this, baby. Just tell the truth. That's all you have to do." But Emma knew it wasn't that simple. Telling the truth in front of her father, in front of the scary lawyers, in front of the judge, while being questioned about the most painful parts of her life, it felt impossible. She stood on shaky legs, Scout immediately rising with her, a perfect mirror of her movements, held the courtroom door open. As Emma stepped through the threshold, she felt the weight of everything that depended on this moment. Her future, her relationship with her mother, her safety, her sanity, and beside her, Scout, this beautiful, noble creature who had already saved her life so many times, ready to save it once more. The courtroom doors closed behind them with a heavy click, like a lock closing on a prison cell. There was no turning back now. The courtroom was colder than Emma had anticipated. Not in temperature, though the air conditioning did bite at her exposed arms, but in atmosphere. It was a cold that came from the polished wood, the sterile fluorescent lights, the heavy air of judgment that seemed to hang over everything like a suffocating blanket. The room was larger than Emma had imagined during her courthouse visit with her therapist, the ceilings higher, the judge's bench more imposing. Everything seemed designed to make her feel smaller. Scout remained pressed against Emma's leg as they walked toward the plaintiff's table. Her mother's lawyer guided them with a gentle hand at its elbow. The courtroom was already filling with people. Emma's father sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a man whose reputation preceded him like a bad smell, was impeccably dressed in a three-piece suit that probably cost more than Emma's mother made in a month. His tie was silk. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was perfectly gelled into place. Everything about him screamed power and money, and the absolute certainty that he would win. Michael Richardson, Emma's father, looked different than he had during the last pickup exchange 2 weeks ago. He'd lost weight. His face was more angular, his jaw set in a hard line. He wore an expression of wounded innocence, the look of a man who had been unjustly accused. Emma's stomach clenched. She remembered this performance. She'd seen it before, the way he could shift his entire demeanor when it was convenient, the way he could make himself appear sympathetic when he needed to. He glanced at Emma for just a fraction of a second, and in that glance was a warning. "Don't betray me." Emma's hands began to shake. Scout immediately pressed more firmly against her leg, a grounding technique. She focused on the weight of the dog against her body, using it as an anchor. In, out, breathe. Judge entered from her chambers, and everyone stood. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore her black robes like armor. She had presided over family law cases for 18 years, which meant she had seen every trick, every manipulation tactic, every heartbreaking variation of human cruelty that could be perpetrated in the name of love. Her expression was neutral as she took her seat and surveyed the courtroom, but Emma caught something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition of Scout, perhaps, or an assessment of the situation before her. "This is the matter of Richardson versus Richardson regarding custody modification and allegations of parental alienation," Judge announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "I have reviewed the submissions from both parties. I understand there is an emotional support animal present. The dog will remain in the courtroom only on the condition that there are no disruptions. One disturbance and the animal will be removed immediately. Is that understood?" "Understood, Your Honor," said respectfully. Nodded curtly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was already planning his strategy. Emma could sense it. He was already thinking about how to discredit Scout, how to paint Emma as a manipulated child, how to construct a narrative in which her father was the real victim here. Emma's mother sat directly behind them in the front row of the gallery, her face pale but determined. She had taken a personal day from her job as a nurse, 3 days without pay that she couldn't afford to lose. Next to her was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Emma's therapist, who carried a thick folder containing months of documentation about Emma's symptoms, her diagnoses, and the correlation between her deteriorating mental health and visits with her father. The evidence was solid. The facts were clear. But Emma had learned that facts didn't always matter as much as narrative, and Michael Richardson and were master storytellers. Judge gestured to the court clerk. "We'll begin with opening statements from the plaintiff's attorney." Stood smoothly. She was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp features and sharper intellect. She had built her career on protecting children, and she approached this case with the intensity of someone who understood what was at stake. "Your Honor, this case is about a child who is being systematically harmed by her father through emotional manipulation, parental alienation, and psychological abuse. We will present evidence through the child's own testimony, through her therapist's detailed notes, and through behavioral observations that demonstrate a clear pattern of deliberate emotional harm." She paused, making sure Judge was absorbing every word. "The child has experienced increasing anxiety, sleep disturbances, academic decline, and depression, all directly correlated with visitation with the defendant. The therapist will testify that these symptoms are consistent with emotional abuse and parental alienation. The defendant has deliberately worked to poison this child's relationship with her mother, has subjected her to inappropriate questions and conversations designed to undermine her maternal bond, and has created an environment of fear and manipulation that is causing serious psychological harm." Sat down. It was a strong opening, but Emma could see already preparing his counter-narrative. He stood slowly, deliberately, moving to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of a predator entering territory he owned. "Your Honor, what we will hear today is a carefully constructed story designed by an emotionally unstable ex-wife, seeking to eliminate a father's relationship with his daughter out of spite and vindictiveness. The defendant is being falsely accused by a woman who lost custody disputes and is now using psychological theories and a therapy dog." He said the words with unmistakable disdain, as theatrical props to manipulate the court's perception. "We will demonstrate that this child has been thoroughly coached, that her testimony is unreliable, and that her father has done nothing but love her unconditionally." Emma felt her chest tighten. The word coached hung in the air like poison. She hadn't been coached, she had been healing, she had been telling the truth. But already she could sense the battle lines forming, the narrative that was constructing. He was painting her not as a victim, but as a puppet. He was painting her mother not as a protector, but as a manipulator. And somehow, with just a few carefully chosen words, he was already making Emma doubt her own reality. Scout seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. The dog's ears perked up slightly. He stayed glued to Emma's side, his body a living wall between her and the hostile courtroom. "The plaintiff calls Emma Richardson to the stand," announced. Emma's heart stopped. This was it. This was the moment everything depended on. She stood on legs that felt like water. Scout rose with her, alert and ready. She placed her hand on his neck as they walked toward the witness stand, drawing strength from his presence. As she climbed the steps to the stand, she caught her father's eye again. This time she saw something darker there, a calculation, a confidence, a certainty that he would destroy her testimony just as he had destroyed so many things in her life. The court clerk approached with the Bible. "Raise your right hand." Emma raised her hand and the nightmare officially began. Emma's hand trembled as she placed it on the Bible. The court clerk's words seemed to come from very far away, as if she were hearing them underwater. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," Emma whispered. She sat in the witness chair, which had been raised with pillows so she could see over the edge of the stand. Scout was positioned directly in front of her, where she could see him, but he wouldn't be in the courtroom's direct line of sight. Had walked her through this dozens of times in preparation. Emma had practiced her testimony until she could recite it in her sleep. But now, sitting here with everyone staring at her, all the preparation seemed to dissolve like mist. Approached gently, her voice warm and encouraging. "Emma, can you tell the court about your visits with your father?" Emma took a deep breath. She was supposed to be calm. She was supposed to be clear. She was supposed to be a reliable narrator of her own trauma. She began to speak about the things her father had said during their visits, the comments about her mother being unstable, the questions about her mother's dating life, the emotional withdrawal when Emma expressed love for her mother. She spoke about the nights she couldn't sleep, the stomach aches that had no physical cause, the panic attacks that would seize her without warning. As she spoke, she noticed her father watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. His expression had shifted from wounded innocence to something colder, more calculating. He was listening not to understand her pain, but to gather ammunition. This examination lasted 20 minutes. It was gentle and thorough, allowing Emma to tell her story without interruption. By the time sat down, Emma had managed to get through the worst of it. She felt Scout's gaze on her, his presence a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Then stood. He didn't walk toward Emma slowly or carefully like Had. He strode to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened slightly, a calculated choice to appear authoritative but approachable. He smiled at Emma, but it was a smile devoid of warmth, the smile of a predator showing its teeth. "Good morning, Emma. My name is. I'm going to ask you some questions about what you just told the court. Is that okay?" Emma nodded mutely. "Now, when you say your father told you your mother was unstable, can you tell me exactly what words he used?" Pulled out a leather notepad, poising his pen like he was about to write down her every word. He said that she was." Emma paused, trying to remember. Had he said unstable, or had she interpreted his words that way? He said she was having trouble thinking clearly. "Having trouble thinking clearly," repeated, writing it down with exaggerated slowness. "That's different from being unstable, isn't it? Lots of people have trouble thinking clearly sometimes. Your mother drinks coffee, doesn't she? Coffee affects thinking. Does that make her unstable?" "No, And when you couldn't sleep after visiting your father, did you tell him about it?" "No, Did your mother ask you questions about whether your father had been mean to you?" "Sometimes, but—" "Yes or no, Emma, did your mother ask you questions?" "Yes." "And when she asked you those questions, how did it make you feel?" Emma hesitated. It was a trick question, she could sense it. If she said it made her feel bad, he would claim her mother was coaching her. If she said it made her feel good or neutral, it would minimize the truth about what her father had done. "It made me feel like someone cared." Smiled coldly. Or it made you feel like you should tell your mother stories about your father to get her attention and approval. Isn't that possible? No, that's not. Emma, children want to please their parents, don't they? They want approval. They want to be listened to. When your mother listens very carefully to stories about your father being mean, she's giving you attention, isn't she? But he was mean. Was he? Or did he simply not agree with your mother? Parents often disagree about parenting approaches. When your father didn't do things exactly the way your mother wanted, did she interpret that as him being mean? Emma's head was spinning. The questions were coming so fast, each one a tiny trap, each one a way of suggesting that she was confused, that her mother was manipulating her, that her own memories couldn't be trusted. "I'm confused," Emma said quietly. "I understand you're confused, Emma. That makes sense. Your mother has been asking you leading questions, hasn't she? She's been suggesting things to you." "No, my therapist." "Your therapist, the one your mother hired, the one who gets paid by your mother. Don't you think that therapist might be biased toward your mother's side?" "My therapist helps me, she doesn't." "Emma, when you told your mother that your father said she was unstable, did your mother seem surprised, or did she seem like she already believed that?" "I don't remember." "You don't remember, but you remember very specifically what your father said, don't you? It seems convenient that your memory is so clear about the negative things your father allegedly said but foggy about your mother's reactions." The courtroom seemed to be closing in. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She looked down at Scout, trying to find that grounding sensation she knew the dog could provide, but she couldn't quite reach it through the fog of confusion. Continued relentlessly. "Emma, isn't it true that you want your mother to win this case? Isn't it true that you're hopping to live only with your mother and not see your father at all?" "I'm scared of him," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Scared of him or scared of disappointing your mother? There's a difference, you know. And when you're scared of disappointing your mother, doesn't that make you more likely to agree with the stories she's already suggested to you?" Emma felt tears beginning to form. She was losing her grip on what was true and what wasn't. The more questioned her, the more uncertain she became. Had she misunderstood her father's words? Had her mother suggested the interpretations? Was she just a confused child caught between two parents? Was she a puppet on strings, dancing to her mother's choreography? Scout's ears perked up. The dog sensed the shift in Emma's emotional state, the rising panic, the drowning sensation that was consuming her. "Isn't it true that you can't actually remember specific conversations?" Pressed. "Isn't it true that you're just repeating things your mother and therapist have suggested to you?" "No," Emma whispered, but even she could hear the doubt in her own voice. Judge's expression had shifted. Her hands were folded on the bench in front of her, but her jaw was tight. She was watching with an intensity that suggested she was beginning to recognize something troubling about his approach, but she hadn't intervened. Not yet. Smiled, sensing victory. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor. We may have more on redirect." He returned to his seat, and Emma sat in the witness chair, shaking, feeling like she had just been hit by something she couldn't see or understand. Her testimony, the truth she had fought so hard to tell, suddenly felt fragile and unreliable. Scout whimpered softly, a sound only Emma could hear. Wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. After's failed redirect, where she tried desperately to restore Emma's confidence but couldn't undo the damage that had been done, stood again, his expression one of hungry satisfaction. "I have a few more questions, Your Honor, if I may," said smoothly. Judge's jaw tightened. "Make them brief, mister." But had no intention of being brief. He had spent 23 years perfecting the art of destroying child testimony, and he was good at it. He approached Emma again, and this time his tone was almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. The sudden shift felt like a trap disguised as kindness. "Emma, I want to help you, okay? I know this is hard, But I need you to think very carefully about what actually happened versus what you've been told happened. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded miserably. "Your father loves you, doesn't he?" It was such a simple question, but it was a trap within a trap. If Emma said yes, would use it to suggest her father couldn't possibly have harmed her. If she said no, she would sound like an ungrateful daughter. "I think so," Emma stammered. "You think so, or you know so. Your father provides for you, buys you things, takes you places, doesn't he?" "Yes, but—" "And has your father ever physically hurt you?" "No, but—" "Has he ever raised his hand to hit you?" "No." "Has he ever called you names?" Emma hesitated. He had called her names: manipulative, a liar, ungrateful. But had he meant them in the way was implying, or had he said them in anger after she had disappointed him? "Sometimes," Emma said quietly. "Sometimes, like when? Can you give me a specific example?" Emma opened her mouth, but nothing came out. In that moment, she realized she couldn't remember. She had told her therapist about him calling her names, but she couldn't recall the exact words or the exact circumstances. The memory was becoming fuzzy, corrupted by doubt. "You can't remember," stated, writing this down with a flourish. "Interesting. You seem to remember very clearly the things that make your father look bad, but when I ask you for specific details about those things, your memory becomes unclear. Why is that?" "I don't know," Emma whispered. "Could it be that you've heard these stories so many times from your mother and your therapist that you've started to believe them even though they didn't actually happen?" "No, I know what happened to me." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're repeating a narrative that's been constructed for you. Let me ask you this. When you're with your father, does he ever ask you directly if your mother has been saying mean things about him?" "Sometimes," Emma admitted. "And what do you tell him?" "That she doesn't say mean things about him." "But you just told this court that your mother asked you questions about your father being mean. Those are contradictory statements, aren't they, Emma?" The room began to spin. Was right. She had said that her mother asked her about the things her father had done, but she was also saying that she told her father that her mother didn't say mean things about him. How could both things be true? Emma looked toward her mother, desperately seeking reassurance, but what she saw in her mother's face broke her heart. Looked devastated, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Emma had done this. She had confused the narrative. She had contradicted herself. She was failing. Scout stood up abruptly, sensing the spike in Emma's distress. The dog's body became rigid with alert, his ears perked, his eyes fixed on Emma with laser focus. "The dog is becoming agitated," noted casually. "Perhaps that's because it can sense that the child's testimony is unreliable, and the child herself is becoming distressed by being confronted with her own contradictions." Judge's eyes flashed dangerously. "Mister, that's an inappropriate characterization. The dog is responding to the child's emotional state, not making judgments about testimony." But pressed on undeterred. "Your Honor, I'll rephrase. Emma, when you think about your visits with your father, are you remembering things that actually happened, or are you remembering things that your mother has told you happened?" I don't know," Emma said, and the words felt like a betrayal of everything she had endured. "You don't know? That's concerning, isn't it? Because if you don't know the difference between your own memories and things you've been told, how can this court possibly rely on your testimony?" "I do know my own memories," Emma tried to say, but her voice had become so small, so uncertain, that she barely sounded convincing to herself. "Let me ask you something else. Has anyone, your mother, your therapist, anyone ever told you that if you don't say certain things in court today, your father might take you away from your mother?" "No," Emma lied. She had heard her therapist explain that if she didn't testify truthfully about what had happened, the judge might let her father have more custody. That was different from a threat, but in the context of question, It sounded like coercion. "You're certain?" Because children often internalize threats that aren't stated directly. They understand that if they don't say what the adults around them want them to say, there will be consequences. Emma felt like she was drowning. Every answer she gave seemed to provide more ammunition to use against her. Every attempt to clarify made her sound more confused. She was trapped in a labyrinth of questions, each turn leading to another dead end. Scout moved closer, pressing his entire body against the side of the witness stand, his presence both comforting and a reminder that even this beautiful dog couldn't protect her from the assault happening in this room. "Emma, if you're not certain about these allegations against your father, wouldn't it be more honest to tell this court that you're not sure? Wouldn't it be better to admit that your memories have been influenced by the adults around you rather than pretend to remember things with certainty?" And there it was, the ultimate trap. If Emma said she wasn't certain, she would be admitting that she had lied. If she insisted she was certain, would continue to present evidence of her confusion and contradiction. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the witness stand to keep herself from falling apart. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She could feel a panic attack building in her chest, that familiar sensation of her heart trying to escape her body, of the world becoming too big and too hostile and too loud. "I need to," Emma started, but she didn't know how to finish. She needed to escape. She needed her mother. She needed someone to stop this. She needed the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Michael Richardson watched his daughter's deterioration with the faintest smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He had won. Even if the testimony continued, he had already accomplished his goal. He had destroyed her credibility. He had made her doubt herself. He had turned her own words against her. Judge's hands gripped the edge of her bench so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She was watching something deeply troubling unfold, not just a cross-examination, but a calculated psychological dismantling of a child's testimony and sense of reality. Her eyes moved between Emma's devastated face, satisfied expression, and Scout, who was now in full alert mode, sensing that the child he loved was in crisis. Was on her feet, objecting frantically, but the damage was already done. Emma sat in the witness stand, shattered, barely holding on, her truth buried under layers of confusion and doubt and fear. In another few minutes, she would have completely abandoned her testimony. She would have admitted to being confused. She would have conceded that she couldn't trust her own memories. She was seconds away from losing everything. Emma couldn't breathe. The panic was consuming her, rising from her belly like a living thing, wrapping itself around her throat and squeezing. Her vision began to tunnel. The courtroom grew distant and blurry. She could hear his voice continuing to hammer away at her, asking more questions, pressing harder, but the words sounded like they were coming through thick water. This was what panic felt like. This was the sensation that had driven her to therapy, that had made her need Scout in the first place. This was the drowning feeling that happened when her mind and body disconnected from reality, when the world became too much, when she couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. She was losing. Her father was going to win. The judge was going to believe that she had been coached, that she was a confused child, that her testimony was unreliable. She was going to lose her mother. She was going to be forced to spend more time with her father, the man who had systematically destroyed her sense of safety and reality. Everything was falling apart. Emma's hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. Her knuckles turned white. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, hyperventilation beginning to set in. Black spots started to appear at the edges of her vision. Scout was going crazy. The dog had moved as close to the witness stand as he could get, his body tense, his ears pinned back. He was whining softly, a sound of pure distress that he picked up from Emma. Scout had been trained to recognize this exact moment, the moment when Emma's anxiety had escalated beyond what she could handle alone, The moment when she needed intervention not just emotionally but physically. Emma looked down at Scout, and through the haze of panic she made a decision. This was why they had practiced. This was why she had spent months working with the dog trainer, learning signals, rehearsing responses. This was the moment everything came down to. Her trembling right hand rose slowly. It was a subtle movement, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Her index and middle finger extended, making a small V shape, and she tapped twice against her leg. Tap, tap. It was the signal. The private language she and Scout had created together. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Continued talking. The courtroom continued its assault. Emma felt a moment of despair. The signal hadn't worked. She was still drowning. Then Scout moved. The dog launched forward with a precision and purpose that transformed the entire energy of the courtroom. Scout's front paws came up and made contact with the witness stand railing, not aggressively, but with focused intention. The dog's body shifted into the alert stance he had been trained for, his entire being radiating focused attention on Emma and only Emma. It was the most beautiful thing Emma had ever seen. Scout's weight against the stand, his eyes locked directly on hers, his body pressed against hers. It was an anchor. It was a lifeline. It was the universe telling her that she was not alone, that she was safe, that someone understood her and would not let her drown. Emma's breathing began to slow, in through her nose, out through her mouth. Scout was here. Scout was real. Scout was solid and present and unconditional. She placed her hand on Scout's head, her fingers sinking into his thick golden fur, and suddenly the world came back into focus. The panic didn't disappear entirely. It was still there, lurking in her chest, but it was manageable now. It was something she could live with. Scout had done the thing he was trained to do. He had grounded her. He had brought her back from the edge of the abyss and reminded her that she existed in her body, that she was safe, that she had an ally in this nightmare. Judge's entire body went rigid. She had seen it. She had witnessed the entire exchange, the signal, Scout's trained response, Emma's transformation from a terrified, disintegrating child to someone whose fear was still present but who had regained some measure of control and clarity. The judge's eyes moved between Scout and Emma, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, understanding, anger. Gasped softly, her hand going to her mouth. Richardson's tears suddenly shifted from tears of despair to tears of something else. Relief, hope, a dawning realization that her daughter had just done something extraordinary. His voice faltered slightly. He had seen it too, the shift in Emma. He had felt the momentum change, but he recovered quickly, his professional mask slipping back into place. Your Honor, the dog's behavior is becoming disruptive. I move that the animal be removed from the courtroom. But Judge held up a hand, her expression hardening into something that looked terrifyingly close to fury. She had spent 18 years on the bench, and she had trained with therapy animals during her own family's crisis. She understood exactly what had just happened, and she understood exactly what it meant. Michael Richardson's satisfied expression faltered. He had been certain of victory mere moments before, but he could sense that something fundamental had shifted. The energy in the courtroom had changed. His daughter's face had changed. And most importantly, the judge's demeanor had changed. Emma sat in the witness stand with her hand on Scout's head, still shaking but no longer disintegrating. Her breathing had stabilized. Her vision had cleared. The panic was still there, but she had reclaimed something essential: control. She had used her tool. She had used her dog. She had used her knowledge of herself and her own healing to push back against the assault. Scout remained in position, his paws on the stand railing, his eyes fixed on Emma, maintaining the grounding presence that she needed. The dog had done exactly what he was trained to do. He had transformed a moment of crisis into a moment of intervention. Judge leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Scout. She was thinking something, calculating something. Her judicial mask was still in place, but beneath it, Emma could sense a storm building. Made another motion to continue with his questioning, but Judge raised her hand with a gesture that screamed authority. "Mister, step back." It wasn't a question. It was a command. Stepped back, confusion flickering across his face. He wasn't accustomed to judges interrupting his cross-examinations. He was the one who controlled the narrative. He was the one who wielded power in the courtroom. But he was about to discover that he had miscalculated. He had pushed too hard. He had been too obvious in his tactics. And worst of all, he had underestimated the power of a child's will to survive, and the extraordinary gift of a dog trained to help her do exactly that. Judge's eyes moved from Scout to Emma too, and in her expression was something that looked very much like righteous anger. "I need to take a brief recess," Judge announced, her voice carrying the weight of a decision already being made. 30 minutes. We will reconvene at 2 p.m. She turned to the bailiff. "Please ensure the child and her support animal are given a private room. I want them to have complete access to whatever they need." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Judge didn't return to the courtroom after the 30-minute recess ended. Instead, she sent word through her clerk that she wanted to meet with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the court-appointed child psychologist who had been observing the proceedings in her private chambers. Was also called back. In the judge's chambers, the atmosphere was tense and cold. Judge sat behind her mahogany desk, her robes draped across the chair back, her expression carved from stone. She gestured for and Dr. Mitchell to sit. "Dr. Mitchell," Judge began without preamble, "in your professional opinion, what did you observe during the cross-examination of Emma Richardson?" Dr. Sarah Mitchell was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the measured demeanor of someone who had spent decades working with traumatized children. She chose her words carefully. "Your Honor, I observed what I would characterize as aggressive, suggestive questioning designed not to clarify the truth, but to destabilize the witness. The pattern was systematic. Each question was designed to plant doubt, to create confusion, to suggest that the child's memories were unreliable. The cumulative effect was psychological assault." "Psychological assault," Judge repeated as if tasting the words. "Can you elaborate?" When a child witness has already been through trauma, their nervous system is primed for threat detection. Mr.'s questioning essentially rewired Emma's perception of her own experience. By continuously suggesting that she was confused, that her mother had coached her, that her memories were unreliable, he created cognitive dissonance, a disconnect between what she knew to be true and what she was being told to believe. This is a recognized technique used by sophisticated cross-examiners, but it's particularly damaging when applied to vulnerable children. Judge nodded slowly, then pulled out a thick folder. Inside were copies of Emma's therapy notes, dating back months. She had reviewed them all during the recess, reading every session, every documented incident that Emma had reported to her therapist. "Dr. Mitchell, look at these notes." Emma reported the same incidents consistently in the same way over a span of 4 months. She provided specific details, dates, phrases her father used, the emotional consequences. She never wavered on the core facts. The reporting is remarkably stable and coherent. In your professional opinion, is this consistent with a child being coached by her mother? Dr. Mitchell reviewed the notes carefully. "No, Your Honor. Coached children typically show inconsistencies. They provide different details when questioned from different angles. They sometimes seem rehearsed or remember things too perfectly. Emma's reporting is exactly what you would expect from a child genuinely processing real trauma. The inconsistencies, the small contradictions that Mr. highlighted, are actually indicative of authentic memory. Real memories have fuzzy edges. They have moments of uncertainty. That's a sign of genuineness." Leaned forward. "Your Honor, what Mr. did was turn Emma's authenticity against her. He took the normal human process of remembering something difficult and used it as evidence that she was lying." Judge stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but seething with barely contained rage. I have been a judge for 18 years. I have seen many things in this courtroom: custody disputes, allegations of abuse, parental conflicts. I have learned to recognize the difference between thorough cross-examination and abuse. What I witnessed this morning was abuse. Mr. didn't ask questions designed to elicit truth. He asked questions designed to destroy a child's sense of reality. She turned back to face them. And the most egregious part, when Emma showed signs of psychological distress, when she began to have a panic attack when she was clearly in crisis, Mr. pressed harder. A responsible attorney would have stepped back. Instead, he accelerated the assault. That is not zealous advocacy. That is cruelty masquerading as lawyering. Nodded, her own anger evident. Your Honor, I would like to file a formal motion regarding improper examination tactics. You won't need to, Judge interrupted. I'm going to address this matter directly and immediately. When court reconvened at 2 p.m., Judge entered with the demeanor of a woman on a mission. She did not sit immediately. She stood at the bench, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom and landing on. Mr. approached the bench. Stood, his confident stride faltering slightly as he approached. Michael Richardson's expression had shifted from confident to uncertain. Mr., I have reviewed the transcript of this morning's cross-examination. I have consulted with Dr. Mitchell, our court psychologist, and I have come to some conclusions that I believe are important for this courtroom to understand. Judge's voice was steady but carried an edge that could cut glass. What I observed this morning was not proper cross-examination. What I observed was a sophisticated, calculated assault on a child witness designed to destroy her credibility and destabilize her sense of reality. You used leading questions not to clarify the truth, but to plant doubt. You suggested coaching where there was evidence of consistency. You pressured the witness even as she was showing signs of severe psychological distress. His face flushed. Your Honor, I was merely conducting a vigorous cross-examination. No, Judge's voice cracked like a whip. A vigorous cross-examination seeks truth. What you conducted was psychological warfare against a 9-year-old child, and I will not have it in my courtroom. She turned to address the full courtroom. The record will reflect that I am finding that Mr.'s cross-examination exceeded the bounds of proper questioning and constituted improper harassment of a child witness. Effective immediately, there will be no further cross-examination of Emma Richardson in this manner. Stood, Your Honor, may I propose an alternative? Please, Judge said. Written interrogatories, questions submitted in writing, reviewed by the court before being read to the witness. They can be read by a neutral court officer rather than by opposing counsel. This allows for proper questioning while protecting the child from further psychological harm. Judge nodded. That is an excellent proposal. Mr., you will submit any remaining questions in writing to the court by 5 p.m. today. I will review them. Any question that I deem to be improper, leading, or designed to manipulate rather than clarify will not be asked. The remaining questions will be read to Emma by our court officer, Ms., in a neutral tone. You will not be present during this questioning. His jaw clenched. Your Honor, with respect, this violates the defendant's right to cross-examine. It does nothing of the sort. The defendant maintains the right to cross-examine, but that right is not absolute. It does not include the right to psychologically traumatize a child. It does not include the right to conduct questioning designed to confuse and destabilize rather than seek truth. It does not include the right to ignore the signs of psychological distress in a vulnerable witness and continue assaulting her anyway. Judge's eyes flashed. I have presided over hundreds of cases, Mr. I recognize abuse when I see it, and I will not permit it in my courtroom. She gestured toward Emma, who sat pale and trembling in the gallery next to her mother, Scout's head resting on her lap. This child has demonstrated more courage in the past 4 hours than most adults show in a lifetime. She has been subjected to the kind of questioning that would break many adults. And then, when that questioning threatened to destroy her, she used every tool at her disposal to save herself. That took extraordinary strength. I will not reward that strength by allowing her to be subjected to further assault. Judge addressed the courtroom. We will adjourn for today. Mr. Submit your written questions by 5 p.m. The hearing will resume tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the questioning I have described. And let me be absolutely clear. Any attorney who attempts to circumvent this order or continue improper questioning will face sanctions and possible referral to the Bar Association. Am I understood? Yes, Your Honor, said quietly, his confident demeanor completely shattered. Judge gaze settled on Emma one final time. The record will also reflect that Scout, the emotional support animal, demonstrated his extraordinary value this morning. His trained, alert response to the child's psychological crisis was both appropriate and necessary. Far from being disruptive, this animal prevented a miscarriage of justice by helping the witness maintain the clarity necessary to protect her own and continue her testimony. She turned back to the bench. This court is adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m. The gavel came down with finality. Richardson pulled Emma into an embrace, tears streaming down both their faces. Scout pressed against Emma's leg, his tail wagging slowly, had her hand over her mouth, emotion evident on her face. Michael Richardson sat in his chair, his expression unreadable, understanding that something fundamental had shifted. His calculated victory had evaporated, and the judge had not just ruled against his tactics, she had named them for what they were: abuse. In that moment, everything changed. That evening, Judge sat alone in her chambers surrounded by documents. The walls were lined with law books and family photographs, a picture of her grandson at graduation, her late husband at their wedding, memories of a life spent seeking justice in the messiest terrain imaginable, family law. She had ordered transcripts of the morning's testimony to be prepared immediately. She had requested copies of every email between Michael and Richardson for the past 3 years. She had demanded copies of Emma's complete medical and psychological records. She wanted everything, analyzed everything, understood everything. Because something about this case had gotten under her skin in a way that few cases did. She had recognized in Emma's testimony something she recognized in her own grandson, a child struggling to trust their own mind, a child whose reality had been twisted by an adult who should have protected them. At 10 p.m., her chambers received a thick folder from. It contained a compilation Emma's therapist had prepared, a chronological record of every session with Emma over the past 18 months, notes about her symptoms, documentation of her reporting, observations about her progress in therapy. Judge began to read. Session 1, 3 months prior. Emma presented with severe anxiety, difficulty sleeping, reported feeling unsafe during visits with her father. Child described father's comments about mother's mental stability and judgment. Child expressed confusion about whose account of events to trust. Recommended twice-weekly therapy. Session 5. Child reported father saying, "Your mother doesn't understand love the way I do. She's incapable. That's why she's like this." Child expressed guilt about loving her mother. Anxiety symptoms worsening. Session 12. Child reported father questioning her about her mother's dating life, asking her to report back to him. Child expressed feeling caught in the middle, feeling obligated to spy on mother. Panic attacks beginning. Session 23. Child reported father saying, "If you love me, you'll be honest with me about what your mother tells you." Child has begun to interpret normal parental communication as betrayal, academic performance declining. Session 31. Most recent session. Child reported continued manipulation but showed marked improvement in ability to identify the manipulation. Child beginning to understand that her father's need for her loyalty is not her responsibility. Judge leaned back in her chair, reading through the clinical observations. Dr. Mitchell had noted a consistent pattern. Emma's reports were specific and detailed. The same incidents were described consistently across multiple sessions, often without prompting. When Emma did hesitate or contradict herself, it was typically about minor details, not core facts, exactly what genuine memory recovery looked like. Then Judge turned to the emails. Email from Michael to, dated 14 months ago. Emma told me you're seeing someone. I need to know more about this man. Emma is confused and needs reassurance that you're not putting her in a dangerous situation. Response from, our personal life is not your business. Emma is safe and happy. Follow-up from Michael. Emma seemed very upset last week. I'm concerned about your new boyfriend's influence on her. Another email, 8 months prior. I'm going to have to request a modification of custody. Emma's anxiety is clearly being caused by your new living situation and your dadding. A child needs stability and a mother who isn't consumed with her own romantic pursuits. Judge's jaw tightened as she read. The pattern was textbook parental alienation and manipulation. Michael was using Emma as an informant, creating an obligation for the child to spy on her mother. He was framing himself as her protector and suggesting that her mother's romantic life was inherently threatening to Emma, even though there was no evidence of any actual danger. There was an audio file attached to one of his emails. Judge's clerk had prepared it for review. She clicked play on her computer. It was a recording of Emma during her therapy session, talking to Dr. Mitchell about her father's most recent comment. Emma's young voice came through the speakers, uncertain and small. He said that if I really loved him, I would tell him what Mom says about him, but I don't want to tell him things. It makes me feel like I'm being mean to Mom. But if I don't tell him, he gets quiet and doesn't talk to me for like a whole day. So I tell him stuff, but then I feel terrible, like I'm betraying Mom. Dr. Mitchell, why does he make me feel like I have to choose? Judge played it again and again. Each time, the pain in Emma's voice was unmistakable. This was not a child being coached. This was a child being systematically trapped between two loyalties, being manipulated into spying on her mother, being emotionally punished for loving both parents equally. She pulled up the court records from the original divorce. The case had been contentious but ultimately straightforward. Joint custody initially ordered, both parents deemed fit. There was no history of abuse, no documented concerns about Michael's parenting. But that was before the psychological manipulation campaign had begun, before Michael had decided that if he couldn't have, he could at least have Emma's exclusive emotional loyalty. At 11:47 p.m., Judge's phone rang. It was Dr. Mitchell. Your Honor, I apologize for calling so late, but I felt you should know something. I've been reviewing my notes from my interview with Michael Richardson's therapist. He's been in treatment for the past 2 years. His therapist indicated, within the bounds of professional confidentiality that she could share, that Michael has a documented pattern of needing to control his relationships. When his wife left him, he had what his therapist described as a crisis of abandonment. His therapist noted that he has expressed anger at his ex-wife and stated that he wants to maintain Emma's loyalty to him above all else. Judge absorbed this information. Is his therapist willing to testify? Unfortunately, no. She cited patient confidentiality, but she was willing to say what she said to me off the record, and she confirmed that Michael's current mindset is one of viewing Emma as the in his war with his ex-wife. After they hung up, Judge sat in silence. The picture was becoming extraordinarily clear. Michael Richardson was not a victim. He was a perpetrator of emotional abuse. He had weaponized his relationship with his daughter to wound his ex-wife. He had created a situation where Emma was forced to choose between her parents' loyalty, a situation that was causing her genuine psychological damage. And his attorney knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the allegations were likely true, but he didn't care. His job was to defend his client by any means necessary, including the psychological destruction of a 9-year-old girl. Judge pulled out a legal pad and began to write. She wrote notes about what she had learned, what it meant, what needed to happen. She wrote about Emma's courage. She wrote about Scout's extraordinary intervention. She wrote about the necessity of protecting vulnerable witnesses from psychological abuse masquerading as cross-examination. By 2 a.m., she had written 12 pages of notes. Her decision was clear. Tomorrow, when the written questioning resumed, it would be the final piece of evidence she needed, and then she would render her judgment. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Emma was probably sleeping better than she had in months, Scout beside her, her mother watching over her. That child had taken a stand for her own truth. She had used every tool available to her. She had survived psychological assault and emerged stronger. Judge believed deeply in the law, in its power to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. Tomorrow, she would use that law to do exactly that. She picked up her phone and texted her clerk, "Please make sure the courtroom is arranged to maximize Emma's comfort and minimize her stress tomorrow. Ensure Scout has adequate space. And please make arrangements for Emma and her mother to have access to a private room throughout the day." The text came back quickly, "Already done, Your Honor." Judge smiled slightly. Her court staff understood what was at stake. They understood that justice wasn't just about facts and law, it was about protecting people, especially the most vulnerable among us. She returned to her desk and began drafting the ruling she would deliver. It would be one of the most important judgments of her career, because it wasn't just about Emma and Michael, and it was about establishing that children's testimony deserved protection, that sophisticated manipulation tactics would not be tolerated, and that love, real love, could never be contingent on silence, secrecy, or betrayal. The final day of the hearing began differently. The courtroom had been rearranged to accommodate Emma's needs. There was now a comfortable chair with cushions next to the witness stand, positioned so she could see Scout clearly without Scout being directly in the line of sight of other courtroom participants. A small table held water and tissues. Everything was designed to minimize stress and maximize Emma's. Emma walked into the courtroom with her mother and Scout. She wore a simple lavender dress that had bought her specifically for this day, something that made her feel brave. Scout wore his service dog vest, his credentials visible to everyone in the courtroom. Michael Richardson sat at his table, his expression guarded, looked diminished somehow, stripped of the confidence he had displayed yesterday. The written questions were read slowly and carefully by the court officer, Ms. Her voice was neutral, her tone respectful. Every question was designed to clarify rather than confuse. Emma answered them with growing confidence, her testimony consistent and clear. By the time the questioning was complete, the picture was unmistakable. Emma was a credible witness reporting genuine abuse. When it was finished, Judge took a long look at the courtroom. Then she spoke. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case. The testimony of the minor child, the professional observations of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the detailed therapy notes spanning 18 months, the email correspondence between the parties, and the audio recordings of the child's therapy sessions. I have also conducted my own research into the psychological impacts of parental alienation and emotional manipulation on child development." She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. "I am now prepared to render my decision." Judge pulled out a document that was clearly substantial in length. She had prepared it during the night, her ruling comprehensive and detailed. She began to read. "In the matter of custody modification, I find that the evidence presented overwhelmingly demonstrates that the defendant, Michael Richardson, has engaged in a systematic campaign of emotional manipulation and parental alienation, designed to damage the plaintiff's relationship with the minor child and to secure the child's exclusive emotional loyalty. This campaign has included, but is not limited to, subjecting the child to inappropriate questioning about her mother's personal life, requiring the child to function as an informant against her mother, using emotional withdrawal as punishment when the child expressed affection for her mother, and creating situations where the child was forced to choose between two loyalties in a way that was psychologically damaging. Michael Richardson's face had gone pale. I further find that the defendant's testimony regarding his intentions toward and treatment of the minor child is not credible. His portrayal of himself as a loving, supportive father is contradicted by extensive evidence demonstrating a pattern of calculated psychological manipulation. I also note that the defendant's counsel employed interrogation tactics during cross-examination that were designed not to clarify truth, but to psychologically destabilize a vulnerable child witness. While zealous advocacy is permitted in family law proceedings, it is not permitted when it rises to the level of emotional abuse of a minor. Sat very still, her hand over her heart. Now, as to custody, Judge continued. The best interests of the minor child, Emma Richardson, are served by limiting her contact with the defendant to supervised visitation only. The defendant is ordered to participate in a court-approved parental responsibility program, specifically one designed to address issues of emotional manipulation and parental alienation. Once the defendant has completed this program and demonstrated genuine understanding of the harm his behavior has caused, and once a qualified family therapist has evaluated his readiness for unsupervised contact, the court may reconsider this order. However, I am making clear that such reconsideration is not guaranteed and will depend entirely on the defendant's demonstrated commitment to reform. Judge turned her attention to Emma, and her expression softened with compassion. I further order that Scout, the emotional support animal in question, shall be recognized as essential to the minor child's psychological and shall have full access to all future court proceedings, medical appointments, and therapeutic sessions related to this case. The presence of this animal has been instrumental not only in supporting the child, but in preventing a miscarriage of justice. Scout's trained alert response yesterday demonstrated extraordinary value and should serve as a model for how therapeutic animals can protect vulnerable witnesses. She looked directly at. I am also issuing a written order regarding improper examination tactics. Copies of this order will be sent to the State Bar Association. While I have concluded that Mr. was acting at the direction of his client in pursuing an aggressive defense, the specific tactics employed, continued questioning despite visible signs of psychological distress, suggestive questions designed to destabilize rather than clarify, and calculated psychological pressure, exceeded the bounds of appropriate advocacy. The State Bar may wish to consider whether additional guidelines are necessary regarding the examination of child witnesses in family law proceedings. His attorney looked stricken. He knew that a referral to the Bar Association could result in serious consequences for his legal career. Finally, Judge said, her voice resonating with authority and finality, I want to address something larger than this individual case. Children who report abuse or manipulation deserve protection, not psychological assault. This case will be used as precedent in my courtroom regarding witness protection, interrogation tactics, and the recognition of therapeutic animals in legal proceedings. I believe it represents an important moment in family law jurisprudence. She closed her document. This order is effective immediately. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. For a moment there was absolute silence in the courtroom. Then Richardson made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp, and pulled Emma into an embrace. Scout immediately pressed against both of them, and for a few seconds it was just the three of them, the family unit that had survived the assault. Emma was crying, but they were different tears than before. These were tears of relief, of vindication, of the truth finally being acknowledged. She buried her face in Scout's neck, and the dog remained perfectly still, providing his grounding presence even in this moment of overwhelming emotion. 3 months later, Emma sat on a park bench with her mother and Scout, watching other children play. She looked healthier than she had in years. Color had returned to her cheeks. She had gained weight she desperately needed, and her smile reached her eyes again. Her father had completed the first phase of his court-ordered program. He had written Emma a letter, a real letter of apology, not the defensive nonsense his attorney had initially drafted. In it, he acknowledged that he had been wrong, that he had used her as a weapon against her mother, that he understood the damage he had caused. The letter was still difficult for Emma to read, but it was a beginning. Scout had become something of a local celebrity. The judge's ruling had drawn attention from family law organizations, therapy animal training centers, and child advocacy groups. Dr. Mitchell had been invited to speak at multiple conferences about the case. Judge's ruling had been cited in 3 other custody cases, each time resulting in stricter protections for child witnesses. Emma was back in school, her grades improving dramatically. She had friends again. She was sleeping through the night. The panic attacks had diminished to occasional occurrences rather than daily terrors. "Mom," Emma said, watching a little girl throw a ball for her dog, "do you think Dad will get better?" Put her arm around her daughter. "I think he's trying, and that's what matters. Whether he succeeds is up to him, but you're already better. You did that." "Scout did it," Emma said, reaching over to scratch the dog's ears. "Scout helped," agreed. "But you did the hardest part. You told the truth even when it was terrifying." That evening, Judge sat in her office, reading the latest update on the case. Emma was thriving. Michael had progressed through his program and was scheduled for reevaluation in 3 months. The case had already been cited in multiple jurisdictions and had contributed to the development of new guidelines for child witness protection in family law. She pulled up the audio recording of Emma's testimony, the moment when Emma had made the signal to Scout. She played it again, marveling at the courage it had taken for a 9-year-old child to fight back against sophisticated psychological manipulation and aggressive legal tactics. Judge had received an email from Dr. Mitchell that day. It contained a photograph, Emma and Scout at the park, both of them smiling, both of them looking peaceful and whole. In the background, looked relieved and hopeful. The email contained just 4 words: "Justice does heal people." Judge printed the photograph and placed it on her desk, next to the law books and family pictures. It served as a reminder of why she had chosen family law, why she fought so hard in a field that could be heartbreaking and frustrating. Because sometimes, when you got it right, when you really listened and protected the vulnerable and held the powerful accountable, you could actually change lives. Emma Richardson had learned that she could trust herself, that her truth mattered, and that she wasn't alone. Scout had taught her that unconditional support could ground you when the world was trying to destroy you. And Judge had learned, once again, why justice wasn't just a concept. It was a necessity, a lifeline for those who had nowhere else to turn. The case of Judge halting the hearing after little Emma sent a secret signal to her dog became more than just a custody decision. It became a watershed moment in family law, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful evidence comes not from expert testimony or legal arguments, but from a child's will to survive and the extraordinary bond between a girl and her dog.